So we're speaking with Wendell Potter, former vice president of CIGNA. Now, you were in corporate communications, is
That's
that right?
David, yes.
So it's not exactly the same as the VP who is deciding on what people will be paying for insurance or making those kind of decisions, but there's certainly still a stigma associated with that position on your resume, is that right?
Well, that's right. And it was a big part of my resume for 15 years. I was with CIGNA for 15 years, and for 4 years before that, I was with Humana in a similar capacity. So all in all, I was with the insurance industry for about 20 years in top communications positions. And you're right, I wasn't the person who made decisions about how much your premiums would be going up or whether or not you'd be able to get a procedure that your doctor said you need. But I was a spokesperson for the industry and for those two companies for a long time.
So as a spokesperson, were you... Let me rephrase it. How much were you directed where you were aware that the reality was A, and the way you were going to spin it was, A asterisk, or maybe B, or maybe even C? I mean, those discussions, are they candid internally?
They're not so much candid as you might think. It's something that you become aware of and over time. When I first started working in the insurance industry, I was not as aware of how companies earn money, how they meet shareholders' expectations, as I was toward the end of my career. It's something you learn as you go up the corporate ladder, and you just kind of absorb that information, and you learn how to be a team player. And that's required. If you expect to advance in a structure like that, you have to be a team player, and you have to go with a party line and support what the company's objectives are. So you just, over time, become a part of it, and you talk with your peers and with others in the organization. So you become aware of what you need to do to help your company meet those earnings expectations every quarter.
Was there any kind of internal dialogue that you were privy to that discussed, well, politically we support Republicans or Republicans support us, or anything partisan that was going on internally?
Oh, absolutely.
To that level? There was.
Absolutely. I was, as part of my job, I was also responsible for supporting or providing communication support for our government affairs departments. So I worked very closely with our lobbyist in Washington and also our head of state government affairs and her staff. And I also, as part of my organization, was responsible for the Political Action Committee disbursements. So I knew who was getting how much money from the Political Action Committee. Over the years, Republicans got by far the most amount of money from the Political Action Committee. That began to change over time when the political landscape began to change and more Democrats were being elected. These companies are not stupid. They know that if they want to get their legislation passed or something defeated they don't like, they have to cozy up to Democrats as well. And particularly the blue dog Democrats and the so-called moderate Democrats who are more likely to listen to them.
What year did you see that shift start to happen? Do you remember roughly?
Well, it began to shift during the Bush years. Obviously, during the early part of the Bush administration, almost all of the support from big insurance went with the Republicans, and that began to change over time when more Democrats were becoming elected. And I guess it began to change with 2004 and 2006, and then 2008. You saw, more and more of the campaign contributions going to Democrats. I suspect you'll probably start seeing that go into reverse as we go into this next election cycle. Yeah. They'll probably be doling out more money to Republicans once again.
So is your sense, and maybe I'm hearing this wrong, that it's not so much that the people in charge of the company or those making decisions politically were conservative and that's why they supported Republicans, but rather that they believed supporting Republicans was going to be the best means to an end? Is that, and as that shifted, they were willing to shift who they supported financially?
Oh, absolutely. They will shift who they support financially. Ideology is very important. I mean, there is that. In fact, I say there are three ways that you can influence members of Congress, and in fact any politician. Money talks, and we all know that. It makes a big difference in campaign contributions and also in lobbying. The other is relationships. It's very, very important to know someone who knows someone, and companies like the ones I work for hired former members of Congress and former staff members to be lobbyists, and you hire them because they have inside connections in Congress and elsewhere. And the other is ideology, and you look for candidates who are more likely to believe as you do, or at least support your pro-business agenda.
Walk us through a little bit. In prepping for the interview with you, you're referred to as a whistleblower in many articles and interviews and so forth. Do you consider yourself a whistleblower? And lead us up to how and when and why you blew the whistle, so to speak.
Yeah, I don't consider myself a whistleblower. I don't mind being called that, because I think it maybe gets some attention and people will ask me, just like you did, what was that all about?
Yeah.
I don't think I'm a whistleblower in the technical sense that I don't have a smoking gun from anything in particular that was going on at CIGNA that I felt was illegal. In fact, I didn't leave to talk about CIGNA or Humana, but about the industry's practices, because I was part of that industry for 20 years, and I spent a lot of time representing my companies at the big trade association meetings in Washington, and I was a part of efforts at the industry level to set up front groups to try to manipulate public opinion one way or another, and to ultimately influence legislation. I became increasingly aware of what insurance companies do to manipulate public opinion and to influence legislation, and also what they do to earn money. And the steps they take, and the links they go to make sure that their shareholders are not disappointed every 3 months when they have to announce their earnings. They don't want that share price to go down. So I became more and more aware of the procedures, the practices to make sure that they're meeting shareholders' expectations, and unfortunately that is at the expense of policyholders, patients, people who are sick. Many people in this country are uninsured because their policies have been canceled, because if they had stayed on the rolls, the companies would have had to spend more money on their claims than they wanted to spend.
Give an example of, so let's say we're 1 month into a quarter and it looks like things aren't on track for that end of the quarter report. What are some of these practices that you saw that were being employed to fix it before they have to report for that quarter?
It falls under the broad category of medical management, and it sounds like a pretty benign expression, but that encompasses a lot of things that are not necessarily very patient-friendly or friendly to policyholders. It can take many different forms. It could be that you'll look more closely at requests for procedures to be covered. It could be a liver transplant or something else that is expensive. You'll have your medical directors, or your medical directors will know that they need to do their part, and often that means denying care that someone needs. Or it might mean that you have your staff take a closer look at the applications that people filled out when they were applying for insurance, to see if there might have been some intentional or unintentional error that was made that could be considered a misrepresentation and grounds for canceling a policy.
Right.
Those things go on when you look for levers that you've got the ability to pull to influence your medical costs, because at the end of the day, that's what counts. Investors look to see how much you're spending on medical costs, and they want that to diminish over time.